Help me welcome Paul Christopher.
There are three primary movements involved in a satanic strategy with the sole purpose of implementing a divine plan to bring about a one-world order and a new world religion, simultaneously ushering in the emergence of an Aquarian Age Christ. Now, the first of these primary movements is the occult, or the practice of the occult sciences. And the occult has been with us since God created Adam and Eve, since Lucifer and 1/3 of God's angels were cast out of heaven. And God forbids us to dabble in the occult in Deuteronomy 18, because this leads to this doorway into the demonic realm. Now, the second primary movement involved in this satanic strategy is the New Age movement. And we're going to see tonight that the New Age movement began in the mid to late 1800s with the rise of spiritualism and theosophy. The third primary movement involved in this satanic strategy is the UFO phenomenon. And it seemed to explode in the late 1940s, 1950s. Now, since we have entered the 21st century, these three primary movements have since merged to form an occult trinity of their own. And we are going to see tonight what they are trying to implement. Now, this following list I'm going to read involves all these strategies: UFOs, UFO contacts, alien abductions, animal mutilations, apparitions of the Virgin Mary, psychic phenomena, the supernatural, religion, the occult, numerology, astrology, science, politics, the United States government and military, television, and certain key individuals, along with the general public, are collectively instrumental in fueling this sinister plan. Now, the New Testament of Scripture enlightens us to this otherworldly dimension. And it says in Ephesians, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Now, if we look at these verses a little more closely, we come across this phrase, the wiles of the devil. Now, when I looked up the word wiles in the dictionary, it means sly tricks or deceit, a stratagem, a satanic strategy. And down here, let's see what we're up against. Against the rulers of the darkness of this world. The rulers of this world. Against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, just take the phrase high places and put that in the back of your mind, because we're going to see how these high places come into play here within the UFO phenomenon. And then we read in Matthew chapter 24, "Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, They shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. Now, if we look at these couple of verses a little more closely, we see false Christs. And we will see tonight how there are two false Christs involved in the New Age movement, involved in the UFO phenomenon. Shall show great signs and wonders. There are great signs and wonders going on right now at an alarming rate. We have all sorts of so-called miracles, apparitions of Mary, bleeding statues, UFOs. There's all sorts of paranormal phenomena taking place throughout the world. Now, if we go down here, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Well, we're going to see just how the desert comes into play within the UFO phenomenon. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. Maybe we'll have some insight into these secret chambers, what they actually are or where they are. Now, since the early 1950s, a period in history when the UFO phenomenon exploded into worldwide events. There were sightings throughout the globe. There were contacts even being claimed. And some of these photos were circulating back then. Some are deemed a hoax. Some are unexplainable. But these photos did circulate. They put into our minds that there was extraterrestrial visitors. Now, also during this period of the 1950s, an entity named Ashtar, who claims to be from outer space, began deliberately contacting certain individuals by means of channeling, telepathy, trance mediums, and even Ouija boards. And this entity named Ashtar was offering salvation and an assortment of other amazing things to humankind in the 1950s. Now, Ashtar claims to be orbiting the Earth in a huge spaceship. He ranks himself Commander-in-Chief of the Free Federation of Planets. Sounds like something out of a Star Trek movie. Ashtar has recently written a book, channeled through a New York businessman, titled The New World Order, that focuses on astounding predictions regarding the future of humanity. Now let's look at some Old Testament Bible verses. Judges in particular, we'll start. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Now down here in Judges again. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam and Ashtaroth, and the gods of Syria, the gods of Zidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the children of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines, and forsook the Lord and served not him. Ashtaroth, and you can see here there were a lot of other gods here. And also in Samuel. Put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you. And the children of Israel did put away Balaam and Ashtaroth and served the Lord only. Now, the similarity in the spelling of these two names, Ashtar and Ashtaroth, in my opinion, is not a coincidence. I believe we're dealing with the same entity. So now we have this Ashtar, or Ashtaroth, an Old Testament false deity who is linked to today's UFO phenomenon. Now, we saw in Matthew 24, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Well, in the 1950s, certain contactees claimed that they were in contact with some of these extraterrestrials, so-called extraterrestrials. And in 1952, a contactee named George Van Tassel, who died in 1978, claimed that he received telepathic messages from more than 20 of these so-called extraterrestrials, including Ashtar, in the Mojave Desert in California. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Subsequently, telepathic contact with the Ashtar Command occurred regularly in the years to follow. Now, the Ashtar Command boasts many great fleets of spaceships occupied by thousands of well-organized ranks of extraterrestrials. And one of its missions includes the evacuation of selected human souls during cataclysmic events that are soon to occur on Earth. Sounds like a rapture scenario. Now, the Ashtar Command has associates. 4 in particular. And 2 of the associates, or some of the extraterrestrials that are supposedly ranked higher, are Soltec and Monka. And these pictures are circulating the internet or New Age bookstores. 2 other associates involved with the Ashtar Command, or Ashtaroth, are Corton and Athena. Now, that's an interesting name. Athena has been recognized as the ancient Greek goddess, the gods of the Old Testament. Now, Athena claims to be a commander of the starship of Sananda. Okay, well, who is Sananda? Sananda claims to be one of the highest ranked extraterrestrials and is often referred to as the beloved commander-in-chief of the Ashtar Command. However, Sananda's main claim to fame is that he claims to be the historical Jesus Christ. He's also recognized as the Master Jesus. And we're going to see how these masters fit into this UFO scenario. But as you can see, they've taken an historical picture of Jesus Christ that has probably been in thousands of churches throughout the world, and they've attached this name Sananda. So they believe that the historical Jesus Christ is an extraterrestrial. Now, at this present time, and at an alarming rate, Sananda, Ashtar, Ashtaroth, members of the Ashtar Command, and legions of other so-called extraterrestrials are channeling messages regularly through thousands of light workers and other human individuals or groups of individuals who today are devoted to New Age ideologies and UFO organizations. Now, I mentioned the word light workers. If you go to any New Age bookstore or read any New Age book, you'll see this term often. Light workers are New Age disciples devoted to the undertaking of this spiritual assignment on Earth, known as the divine plan, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This divine plan is a spiritual reorganization of the planet. And we're going to see how they're attempting to do this. Now let's go back to the 1950s once again. And as I said before, the 1950s was a very important decade. UFO sightings were occurring at an alarming rate. Thousands, millions of people around the globe witnessed a variety of objects in the skies. This object, this picture here was taken over Texas. It's known as the Lubbock Lights. It's a famous UFO picture. This was taken in Oregon, Salem, Oregon. And these pictures have been circulating for years, instilling in our minds that maybe we are being visited by so-called extraterrestrials. Now, I mentioned the contactee, George Van Tassel, and his contacts with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command in the Mojave Desert in California. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Well, let me define the word contactee. A contactee is a person who claims to have recurring physical and telepathic contact of a friendly nature with so-called extraterrestrials, as opposed to an abductee. I'm sure we're familiar with the term abductee. People who claim they are taken against their will. Well, these contactees, or these contacts in the 50s and 60s, were of a friendly nature. Now, during the 50s, there were other contactees who stepped forward, claiming contact with these supposed extraterrestrials in the Mojave Desert. And one of the most influential contactees was named George Adamski, who died in 1965. Now, Adamski was publicly acknowledged as the first contactee. He became a celebrity. He toured the world. He purportedly met a being named Orthon, who supposedly stepped out of a spaceship in the Mojave Desert in California. Now, if we look at this name Orthon, O-R-T-H-O-N, we see a resemblance to the ancient Viking or Norse god Thor, T-H-O-R, O-R-T-H, the false gods of the Old Testament. Now, Orthon claimed that he was from the planet Venus, and he communicated to Adamski a message of peace and love. But Adamski described Orthon's physical characteristics as bearing a striking resemblance to religious paintings of Jesus Christ. Now, interestingly, if we look at the name Adamski, we see a remarkable resemblance to the name Adam, who, as we know, was the first man created by God. Adamski was the first recognized contactee. Now, curiously, in 1963, 2 years before he passed away, Adamski supposedly had a secret meeting at the Vatican in Rome with Pope John the 23rd. Now, that's very interesting. A man claiming contact with so-called extraterrestrials has a meeting at the Vatican. Now, I'd like to mention George Van Tassel again, who was one of these contactees, contacts in the Mojave Desert. Well, he founded an organization called the Ministry of Universal Wisdom. And he began these regular Saturday night spacecraft conventions in the Mojave Desert in California. And at these meetings, there were channeling sessions and lectures from other contactees, including George Adamski. He was one of them. Another interesting contactee who also lectured and had channeling sessions was Gabriel Green. We're going to talk about Gabriel Green in just a minute. But the point I want to make here is that we had large groups of people at these conventions. In fact, they were held at a place called Giant Rock. This was the rock, and it was in the Mojave Desert, and this is supposedly a UFO sighting, but nobody seems to be looking at it. But it was estimated sometimes as many as 10,000 people participated or went to these conventions from the 1950s to the 70s, so for 20 some odd years. And they were anticipating these channeled intergalactic gospel messages of these various extraterrestrials through these certain contactees who were making these claims. Now, George Van Tassel also channeled messages from another entity named Solganda, which is very similar to Sananda. It may be the same entity. And this entity instructed him to build a device inside a 4-story high dome structure known as the Integratron. Now, the Integratron was a machine, and it was supposed to rejuvenate the elderly and stop the aging process of our youth. And that sort of sounds like everlasting life to me. So we channeled these instructions from Solganda to build this thing out in the desert. And as you can see, he did. But he didn't finish it. He died. But he spent almost $250,000 on this project. And it just sits out there in the desert. Now, I mentioned the contactee Gabriel Green, who also was involved in these spacecraft conventions in the Mojave Desert in the 50s. And he lectured there and he channeled messages. But Green claims that since the 1950s, he is in contact both physically and telepathically with Ashtar, Ashtaroth, and the Ashtar Command, and another group of extraterrestrials known as the Space Masters of the Great White Brotherhood. But the clincher was that these supposed extraterrestrials asked Green to run for President of the United States in 1960. He eventually withdrew in support of John F. Kennedy. But 2 years later, in 1962, he ran for U.S. Senate in California and received almost 250,000 votes. Well, who was this guy? 10 years later, in 1972, he again ran for President of the United States under the Universal Party. And the Universal Party offered the American people solutions to national and international problems proposed by extraterrestrial beings through outer space contact. Now, interestingly, these supposed extraterrestrials influenced Green in supporting the economics of a cashless society, a system supposedly in use on other planets. And of course, today, as we witness this rapid growth of a one-world economy and this institution of a new world order, this cashless society is racing towards reality. Now, if all this was going on with this character back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it's amazing that, well, we have to think about the leaders that are involved in politics now. Who's influencing them? Okay. In 1984, Gabriel Green channeled a specific message from Ashtar regarding the imminent return of the Aquarian Age Christ. And Ashtar informed Green that the second coming of the Christ will occur when a spaceship makes its first public landing. The Christ will, of course, be on board. Interesting. Now, I've talked a lot about channeling. And channeling is one method of contact with these so-called extraterrestrials. It's going on at an alarming rate today. But to fully understand what channeling is, we have to define the three types of channeling. And the first type of channeling is called full body channeling. And it occurs when the soul of the human individual leaves his or her body. And this unseen entity or supposed extraterrestrial literally takes over and possesses. It incarnates the individual's body, utilizing it as its own. Now, this is very similar to demonic possession. Now, in New Age circles or UFO literature, these entities are often referred to as walk-ins or starseeds. These are important terms to remember because once you see those terms, you'll know exactly what they are. These are full-body channelers or demonically possessed people. And supposedly there are a lot of them out there right now. And they're involved in organizations. The second type of channeling is called conscious channeling. And it occurs when these unseen entities or supposed extraterrestrials join the human in his or her body. The human is conscious of this joining and provides a vehicle for this entity to work through. Now, in New Age terminology, this is often referred to as twin souls. So if you see the word twin soul, you know these are conscious channelers. And oftentimes, if you read a manuscript or a book by a channeler, he or she will often mention, I have two souls. I'm a twin soul. The third type of channeling is called trance channeling. And it occurs when a human individual enters into a trance-like state. So they're not conscious of this entity coming in and utilizing this person's body and speaking directly through it. Now, this is very similar to what happens when an apparition of the Virgin Mary occurs. The visionary enters into a trance-like state. And it's usually only that person or a group of people that can see the Virgin or the supposed apparition. Oftentimes, their bodies contort. Their eyes roll back in their heads. It's a really frightening thing to see these people. Now, when trance channeling is taking place, there's usually another individual there who's transcribing or writing these messages down because the trance channeler is unconscious to what's going on. And as a result of all these channelings, numerous books are written and published. And in fact, if you walk into a New Age bookstore, 80 to 90% of the material in there is channeled. And I mentioned Ashtar's book at the beginning, The New World Order. That's a channeled manuscript. Okay. So we can see that channeling is strikingly similar to demonic possession, whereby a possessed person succumbs to this unseen entity or demon's power. And in so doing, their entire being or will are taken over by that entity, by that demon. Now, I often wonder how many thousands of people are actually becoming possessed or are possessed by demonic entities today. Now, interesting, channeling dates back to the ancient Egyptians and Greeks. This is a channeler out of Australia who channels this master. I'm going to talk about these masters in a minute. But channeling is nothing new. It goes back to the ancient times, the ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Babylonians, who channeled communications from these various gods or disembodied spirits. The gods of the Old Testament. That's how they communicated with them. Now, in all likelihood, these same false deities out of Scripture are disguising themselves as extraterrestrials, because we live in a technological society. Now, channeling is not the only method to communicate with these supposed beings. Another popular method is called automatic writing. And automatic writing is achieved while an individual is in a trance-like state, similar to trance channeling. But this time the person is holding a pen or pencil in a normal fashion. The ability to write is then imparted to the recipient by some invisible intelligence. Now, automatic writing dates back to the 19th century in Europe, when the planchette, an improved version of the Ouija board, had a pencil attached to the Ouija pointer. So these direct transcriptions of these spiritual messages could be written down onto a piece of paper. Eventually, the planchette was discarded, and this direct communication took place by direct means. They didn't need the Ouija board. They just sat there with a pencil in their hand and started writing. Now today, it's changed once again. Since we have technological achievements and we now have computers, a person sits at the keyboard, and just starts typing away in a trance. Now, I mentioned the Ouija board, and that's another contemporary method used to communicate with these supposed extraterrestrials. And I was amazed when I ventured into a New Age bookstore, and there's plenty of them out there. They're in every major city throughout the world. And I saw a Ouija board at the back table, but it wasn't called a Ouija board. You know what it's called now? An angel board. Now, the Ouija dates back 500 years before Christ. It was an old instrument used by the Chinese to supposedly communicate with their dearly departed. Similar instruments were used by the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks, who attempted to obtain these revelations from the spirit world. That's exactly what's going on today. Only these entities are disguising themselves as extraterrestrials, or spirit guides, or masters. We're going to see how these masters come into play. So, as Christians, we can see that the Ouija board and these similar methods it opens this doorway. This is very dangerous. It opens this doorway into the realm of the demonic. And all these occult meditations that I've mentioned are highly dangerous. Don't ever get involved in any of these things, because they can lead to possession and oppression. In fact, once these entities latch onto an individual, they torment them mentally and physically for years, sometimes till they die. And the only way to rid yourself of this occult meditation and from these demonic entities is through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's the only way. So if you know anybody involved in this, please witness to them, because they are in danger. Now, I mentioned earlier this explosion of the UFO phenomenon in the 1950s. And there were sightings, there were photographs. Now, while this was going on, there was also a revival in the occult sciences. People were dabbling in the occult. And occultists believe that they are able to use or control these powers, these supernatural powers that are hidden from them. They usually operate secretly and often disguise these subversive activities. Hence we have secret occult societies. Now we've all heard of these secret occult societies, such as the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Rosicrucians, Satanists, and even modern-day psychics, channelers, and trance mediums, who summon these supernatural beings are attempting to use and control their powers. But in actuality, the powers of these supernatural beings end up controlling them. Now, by dabbling in the occult during this time, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, these decades, they've evoked these supernatural entities, these gods of the Old Testament, these beloved space brothers from outer space, these demonic beings. So, now as a direct result of this occult revival, and also this contact with these supposed ETs, over the past 50 years, a new religious movement has emerged, known as the New Age movement. And an integral part of this New Age movement is the undertaking of this spiritual assignment, known as the divine plan. Now, as we can see, in all likelihood, this extraterrestrial appearance is a costume. It's a smokescreen. But thousands of people are being deceived. Now, as Christians, we can recognize this smokescreen because the Bible tells us. Beware of the wiles of the devil. Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. And his demons can be ministers of righteousness. We know that. But a lot of people are being deceived. They're being deceived because they've been conditioned to think that these craft and these entities are benevolent or extraterrestrial. And in fact, over the years, through the contacts, they claim they will save the planet when these cataclysmic changes will come upon the earth. Many feel they will be rescued and taken to another planet. But lately, they appear to be waiting for something, for some moment in time. Time for what? It's very possible that this timetable may indeed coincide with the emergence of the Antichrist. We're going to see how that comes into play. Now, another outer space being involved with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command, who channels messages regularly through numerous individuals, is Kudhumi. He's often called the world teacher. He's often recognized as one of the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood. Now, earlier I spoke about Gabriel Green and his contacts with the space masters of the Great White Brotherhood. These are the same entities. And there's a group of them. Now, Kudhumi, along with other ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, in cooperation with Ashtar and the Ashtar Command and various other extraterrestrials, they are the initiators of this divine plan, this spiritual reorganization of the planet and its mission that is being carried out by these New Age disciples today. Now, the origin of these ascended masters and their connection with present-day New Age teachings goes back more than 100 years. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that the New Age movement actually was started because of events that took place in the mid to late 1800s. And at this time, 3 women arose. Helena Blavatsky, Annie Besant, Alice Bailey. They played the part of an occult female trinity. And they claimed to be in contact both physically and telepathically with these ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who claimed residence on the planet Venus, like Adamski's extraterrestrial friend Orthon also claimed residence on Venus. There were higher masters, and they were called the Lords of the Flame. A group of lower masters, known as the Lords of the Seven Rays, was in direct contact with these 3 women. Now, the revelations received by Blavatsky, Besant, and Bailey have since guided the course of today's New Age movement. These 3 women were so influential on this entire New Age movement. Events that were going back to the late 1800s. Now, Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in 1875 in New York as a direct result of these communications from Master Kudhumi. In fact, she claimed that in 1868 she met Kudhumi face to face. 27 years later, in 1895, Alice Bailey, at the age of 15, claims she met Kudhumi face to face and believed she was in the presence of the historical Jesus Christ, who informed her that she would be involved in an important mission. And indeed, she was involved in an important mission because she eventually channeled 19 books from these ascended masters, most of which came through Jwal Khul. And these pictures are circulating the internet. They've even taken Melchizedek out of the Old Testament and elevated him to an ascended master. But in 1919, she claimed that Jwal Khul communicated to her through channeling, and he dictated a book called The Externalization of the Hierarchy, which reveals the plan, the divine plan. The divine plan revealed startling New Age concepts for the development of a one-world economy and a one-world religion, the cornerstone of today's emerging New World Order. This is back in the early 1900s. Now, leaders of the New Age movement throughout the world revere this plan, this divine plan. And its revelations have fueled this present mission that is being carried out to promote this New World Order. Now, throughout the years, these ascended masters have been referred to by an assortment of titles, such as spiritual hierarchy of ascended masters is one of their titles. Illumined ones, which strikingly is similar to the Illuminati. Great White Brotherhood, they're often called. Great White Lodge. Tibetan masters. That's interesting. Tibetan. Well, actually, their earthly residence is supposedly in the Himalayas, near Tibet. Spiritual wickedness in high places. They're also often called the Masters of Wisdom. Remember that term. The Masters of Wisdom. Now, interestingly, some occultists affirm that these ascended masters are, in fact, spiritual, godlike human beings who possess great magical skills and powers. They supposedly have the ability to control these forces in the spiritual realm. It is claimed that they can prolong their lives for centuries. One who makes that claim is Saint Germain, or Master Rakosi. They can prolong their lives for centuries. That sounds similar to a vampire. And when they prolong their lives for centuries, they are supposedly forever guiding humanity's destiny by influencing key people on Earth. And that's what they're doing. Alice Bailey is a prime example. Now, in 1948, 1 year prior to her death, Alice Bailey channeled a manuscript, another manuscript, titled The Reappearance of the Christ. The Reappearance. Which revealed that the time for the Christ to appear was indeed approaching. This is 1948. The UFO phenomenon was beginning to unravel here. Now, the channeled literature of Alice Bailey had a significant influence on another central figure involved with the New Age movement, Benjamin Creme. Now, back in the 1950s, and again, I bring up the fact that this UFO phenomenon was exploding at this time, during this decade. Well, Benjamin Creme read George Adamski's book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. Remember George Adamski, first contactee, publicly recognized contactee. And Creme was intrigued with Adamski's claims of this contact with these so-called extraterrestrials. Soon after he read Adamski's book, Creme joined George King's Etheria Society, a London-based flying saucer contactee organization. Now, King was an occultist, but he claimed to be in contact with the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, who he believed were a group of extraterrestrial beings. In fact, he was in contact through channeling with Master Jesus, one of these ascended masters, or Sananda, who he believed was the historical Jesus Christ. And in 1958, he received a prophetic message regarding the emergence of a great avatar, a cosmic master with great magical powers, who will arrive on the earth in a spaceship. Now, during Benjamin Creme's stay with George King's Etheria Society, he also began receiving these messages, these channeled transmissions from the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood. He eventually left the Etheria Society, and the ascended masters informed him of the reappearance of their leader. The reappearance of their leader, Lord Maitreya. Maitreya informed Creme that he could be a principal factor in his quote-unquote second coming, if he so desired. And he did desire. Soon after, Maitreya channeled messages again to Creme, informing him that his manifestation and reappearance to the modern world was soon. He told Creme to publish this news, and Creme did. He continues to publish this news. In 1977, these channeled messages from Maitreya to Creme revealed that his manifestation, Maitreya's manifestation, was complete. So he was a spirit entity, and he supposedly manifested into human form. He claims that he descended from this mystical Tibetan kingdom named Shambhala, or Shambhala, which is located somewhere in the Himalayan mountains, the supposed residence of these ascended masters on Earth, when they're on Earth. When he descended from Shambhala, he resided in London, England, and he claims to reside there today. Now, after this manifestation was complete, he instructed Krem to proclaim this. Krem lectured throughout Europe and North America, proclaiming that Maitreya was indeed manifested on the earth. Now, not long afterwards, in April 1982, a newspaper ad appeared declaring that Christ is now here. And this circulated through almost every major newspaper in the world. This declaration intended to inform humanity that the Christ would appear within the next 2 months. Evidently, however, this spectacular appearance never occurred. Now, if we read under here, who is the Christ, we can gain insight into what is going on here. And I'll read it to you. Throughout history, humanity's evolution has been guided by a group of enlightened men, the masters of wisdom, the ascended masters. They have remained largely in the remote desert and mountain places. Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Spiritual wickedness in high places, the Bible warns us. The Bible warns us of this deception, that these false Christs will arise. Now, interestingly, Maitreya still claims that he's going to reveal himself to humanity as the Christ by appearing on national television. Krem also proclaimed that in 1984, Master Jesus manifested himself on the earth and is currently residing in Rome. And like Maitreya, he's waiting for this right moment in time to emerge or publicly reveal himself. And once he emerges, he will attempt to unite the religions of the Eastern and Western hemispheres into a one unified religion. Now, at this point, I'd like to clarify this Master Jesus and Lord Maitreya. They're actually two entities, two separate entities. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the false Christ, that there would be two false Christs. Now, what these people or this New Age movement believes is that Maitreya manifested himself on the earth 2,000 years ago. That's why I keep saying reappearance. And that the historical Jesus Christ body was merely a vehicle for the Lord Maitreya's spirit. They claim that through a process called spiritual overshadowing, Maitreya's consciousness was able to guide the actions and teachings of the historical Jesus Christ. That's what they believe. In fact, other religions believe that Maitreya's actions and teachings guided their Christs, their Messiahs. Now, according to Krem and these other New Age leaders, supposedly Maitreya's presence has had some impact in today's society, even though his spectacular appearance fell short. For example, in August of 1987, and that's a very important time period in history, a lot of events occurred in August of 1987. And at this time, Krem announced that there would be these significant changes in international political structures. So what has happened since August of 1987? Has there been any changes? Yes. We've seen, one, the breakup of the Soviet Union, or the supposed breakup of the Soviet Union. We've seen the Berlin Wall come down. The unification of Germany, that's a major political event. We've seen a formation of a democratic government in South Africa. We've also seen, frighteningly, the rise of the United Nations, who appear to be an organization that wants to rule the world. We've also seen, frighteningly, the rise of the United Nations, who appear to be an organization that wants to rule the world. Now, Lord Maitreya, who claims the title World Teacher, is often recognized by another name, Sanat Kumara. Now, Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky both claimed that Sanat Kumara was the supreme deity of these Lords of the Flame, these higher ascended masters who resided on the planet Venus. Another title of Sanat Kumara is Lord of this world. And at this present time, these New Age leaders are proclaiming Sanat Kumara or Maitreya as the Christ. Now, if we look at this name Sanat, which closely resembles Sananda, but if you rearrange the letters, it spells Satan. Now, another organization involved in promoting Sanat Kumara, or Lord Maitreya, as the Christ, is Lucis Trust, which is another theosophical organization. And it was founded in New York City by Alice Bailey in the 1920s. Prior to this, it existed as the Lucifer Publishing Company. How blatant can you be? Now today, frighteningly, Lucis Trust is powerfully linked to the United Nations, with its American headquarters curiously near the United Nations Plaza in New York City. Now, two other headquarters are strategically placed in London. These people are corporate people. They could be doctors, lawyers, powerful people, military people. So we have to be aware of this, that this satanic strategy has a network of very important people, or very powerful people. And Lucis Trust and all these subsidiaries of Lucis Trust were conceived by Alice Bailey as a direct result of these contacts with these ascended masters, the illumined ones, the Illuminati maybe. Now, a few minutes ago I mentioned Benjamin Krem's announcement in this August 1987, this important time period, and that these significant changes were going to take place as a direct result of Maitreya's presence on Earth. Well, that same month and year, another major event took place. Thousands of New Age disciples flocked to specific geographical locations to join together in an event known as the Harmonic Convergence. And supposedly during this event, an astrological alignment of our 9 planets occurred. They believed that this was a stepping stone in this dawning of a new age. But interestingly, at least 144,000 people were required to mass meditate simultaneously at these particular sites. They were supposed to generate this harmonious energy so the earth would not be destroyed. They believed that if they did this, the earth would not end in the year 2012. Now, this 2012 is now a real popular date with these New Agers. They feel that at this time period now, there's going to be a new evolution on the earth. That's what they believe, that something fantastic is going to happen because they did this. They were involved in this event, this mass meditation of more than 144,000 people, but they required 144,000. Now, that's odd that they picked that number, because we know that in the book of Revelation, 144,000 special witnesses will be miraculously protected by Christ during the Great Tribulation. So we can see how they mix these biblical events or these biblical numbers. Now, following this meaningful harmonic convergence of 1987 was to be a period of social, political, and religious change. And we started seeing some of those changes. The Berlin Wall, Soviet Union. But there's also to be an increase in visits from extraterrestrials. Now, I mentioned earlier these specific geographical locations throughout the world where this harmonic convergence took place. And many of these locations are considered sacred sites, sacred mountains, where ancient peoples believed that supernatural forces and supernatural beings existed. In fact, they marked out these places. These geographical locations are often called power spots or windows. Sometimes they call them gateways, portals, power points. They're recognized as vortexes of high psychic energy. In recent years, they become popular havens for psychics. Channelers flock there. Followers of the New Age movement set up camp there. They claim that these high concentrations of psychic energy exist in these particular locations. They also claim that they're channeled transmissions from so-called extraterrestrials, and these various ascended masters are more readily attained at these specific geographical locations or these power spots. In fact, they believe that the veil that separates our world, our physical reality, from the supernatural dimension is thinner, and their channeling comes through easier. And it's true. That's what does happen there. In fact, these entities, they tell these humans to go to these places, to go to these ancient sacred sites. Now, I once mapped out the United States with these particular power spots and other phenomena that have taken place. Let me stick a portion of the East Coast here. And you can see there's a lot of activity in certain areas. And a lot of these areas are considered power spots. The arrows represent UFO sightings or contacts. There's also red dots that represent animal mutilations. There's blue dots. They represent apparitions of the Virgin Mary. There's also green dots, which represents reports of mysterious creatures. All these stars, star-like areas, are these power spots. And all sorts of paranormal phenomenon occurs in these locations. Now, I grew up in northeast New Jersey, up in here, an area that is inundated with activity. And the reason I'm here tonight is because I had UFO sightings in this area when I was a kid, growing up. In fact, when I was 13, I had an overwhelming sighting. I was out on the front lawn with my dad. We loved to stargaze. We had a telescope. We had binoculars. We were standing outside on the front lawn when all of a sudden a huge white object came streaming overhead. had a horizontal path right in front of us. And in fact, I later found pictures of an object that was very similar to what I saw. And these photos were actually taken in New Jersey, over the Oradell Reservoir, which was not very far from my home, just a couple miles. And after I had this sighting, I became consumed by this phenomenon. In fact, I started seeing these objects more and more. Why was the Lord having me see these things? I became obsessed with the UFO phenomenon. I thought at that time we were being visited by something extraterrestrial, or there was something going on. And I pursued the phenomenon. I virtually read every book I could get my hands on. When I got my driver's license, I drove to these places and sat looking for these things. I tried to photograph them. I tried to get evidence. And reading some of these books, and one book in particular, a book by John Keel titled UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, he attributed a lot of UFO sightings to certain areas, certain geographical locations, that he believed magnetic deviations existed in the Earth. I thought this was very interesting. So I pursued that. I rode to Washington, D.C. and bought maps, aeromagnetic maps of New Jersey. And this particular map was of a reservoir where I found out there was a lot of sightings occurring in this particular location. It was about 40 miles from my home. And in blue is the outline of the reservoir. And there was only one road that went over the reservoir. I usually parked right in here, so I had a good view over the whole reservoir. But I was there so often, the police eventually kicked me out. They didn't want me parking there. In fact, the curve in the road there was called Dead Man's Curve. They didn't want me parking there. But when I bought these maps, I outlined the deviation in the Earth's magnetic field, and that's this red mark, these red marks. So there was something to this. In fact, I bought other maps of New Jersey and found that there were these deviations in the Earth's field, the magnetic field. Now, interestingly, like I said before, other paranormal phenomena occur in these areas, not just UFO sightings. We have mysterious creatures often seen in these areas. We have physical and telepathic communications taking place with these ascended masters, with supposed extraterrestrials. We have animal mutilations. We even have apparitions of the Virgin Mary. Now, interestingly, occultists believe that these particular power spots are sacred pagan worship sites and were specifically marked out by ancient cultures. In fact, we have megaliths dotting our landscapes all throughout the globe, marking these spots. Stone structures, stone circles, pyramids, stone temples, Indian mounds. They're everywhere. These are considered sacred sites, sacred mountains, power spots, areas where a magnetic deviation exists. And the ancient peoples knew about these spots. The Indians have legends about supernatural beings, supernatural forces. They were forbidden to climb some mountains because they would anger the gods, the false gods of the Old Testament. Spiritual wickedness in high places. Maybe these are the secret chambers in Matthew 24. Now, These power spots are all over the place. They're all over the globe. And in fact, in each state in the United States, there is at least 1 to 10 of these places. And these were people flocked to during the Harmonic Convergence. And we're going to see that they're still flocking to these areas. 2 of the major power spots in the United States are Sedona, Arizona, and Mount Shasta, California. Another major power spot is the Teton Mountain Range up here, western Wyoming. We also have the Black Hills of South Dakota, recognized as a power spot. The Great Pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge in England. These are all considered power spots. Now, I happened to be in Sedona not too long ago. And Sedona, Arizona is a New Age capital. It's a New Age mecca. In fact, you can see in the bookstores, they even have some idols. But they have psychics and channelers, people doing tarot. It's a big New Age center. And some of these power spots are Airport Mesa is one power spot. You can see some people meditating up here. This is where they channel and they mass meditate. Sedona, Arizona was one of the major spots when the Harmonic Convergence took place. This is another power spot, Cathedral Rock. Notice these are high places. And another power spot is Bell Rock, another high place. People conglomerate to these areas. They believe this is a vortex, a doorway into this other realm, this supernatural realm where they can communicate. They can contact these entities. Now, while I happened to be over Sedona that day, I noticed some contrail activity. Now, some of you might be familiar with the contrails that people claim are not normal contrails. A normal contrail consists of ice crystals or particles forming in the sky. But there are other contrails occurring that don't appear to be normal, where these jets are flying over and appear to be spraying something, maybe a chemical, in the sky. And there was a New Age expo going on during this day, so a lot of people were in this area. But they weren't noticing these contrails. I noticed them. And interestingly, after these contrails took place, that's what the sky looked like. It was cloudy. Now, I've lived in Arizona for quite some time. It's hardly ever cloudy in Arizona. It's always a blue, blue sky. So why were these jets flying over in these patterns? So why are they cloudy? And maybe they're putting chemicals in the sky. It's very possible that this is the case because a lot of people are getting sick. They're complaining upper respiratory problems. But we need to be aware of this activity that is going on right now. So don't hesitate to look up and see what's going on up there. And they are designed to read a transdermal computer chip called a MARC, Multiple Automated Readout Computer Chip, which is supposedly inserted in the back of the hand and or the forehead of military personnel. Now, the reason these chips are placed in the back of the hand or the forehead is because this is where a more frequent change of temperature occurs in the skin, thus powering the chip. Now, if this technology exists in the not too distant future, we may only be able to buy food or clothing if we have this mark inserted. And if we read in Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So we need to be aware that this technology may indeed exist. Now, I mentioned these power spots, these geographical locations throughout the world, and there's thousands of them. I mentioned that all sorts of paranormal activity can occur in these areas. People flock to these areas to receive this psychic energy from these extraterrestrials, from these ascended masters. And if you look at these spots on the map, you see the different activities going on in these areas. They're conglomerated. In fact, over here is the Mojave Desert, where all the activity occurred in the 1950s. Sedona, Arizona. In fact, if you look at the reports of the Phoenix Lights, the major UFO sighting in 1997, it was first reported near Sedona. Then it slowly crept down through Prescott, and then hovered over Phoenix, where most of the videotapes and photographs were taken. It then exited somewhere down here in Tucson. Arizona's loaded with these power spots, these areas of high psychic energies. Now, I mentioned too that these people conglomerate in these areas. There are New Age organizations that have formed, and they locate themselves in these areas. One in particular is Church Universal and Triumphant. Elizabeth Clare Prophet, a New Age leader. And she has finally settled her group up here, near the Teton Mountain Range, one of the major power spots in the United States. And she claims to channel these ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, Master Jesus, Kudhumi, Saint Germain. It is also believed that these power spots are connected with lines of energy, that there's lines connecting them. In fact, the ancients called them ley lines, because they believed that these lines of energy existed. In fact, when a UFO sighting occurs, maybe they're following these lines, because we hear reports of 90-degree angle turns at a high speed. They're defying the laws of gravity. Well, it could be just moving along these lines. In fact, there are other theories that there's a gigantic grid of this energy all across the Earth. And it's connected to such places as the Bermuda Triangle, where mysterious disappearances have occurred. So these energies exist, and it may be that these demonic spirits are utilizing these power areas. That's how they are manifesting and contacting people, through these energy spots. Now, beginning in 1995, these power spots around the globe attracted large groups of New Agers who began celebrating 3 major full moon festivals. And they are annually known as the 3 linked spiritual festivals. And during these 3 significant festivals, groups of thousands of people conglomerate to these power spots. Mount Shasta, Sedona, the Tetons, and other power spots in each state. And they form groups, and they call themselves transmission meditation groups. And they simultaneously channel and mass meditate these transmitted energies from these various extraterrestrials like Ashtar, the Ashtar Command, Sananda, some of the ascended masters of the Great White Brotherhood, such as Kuthumi, Lord Maitreya. Now, interestingly, or I should say frighteningly, these transmission meditations go on for 24 hours. They are the prime initiator of these transmission meditations is Lord Maitreya. In fact, these transmission meditations begin London time, because Maitreya supposedly is residing in London. He sets the time. Then everybody channels and mass meditates for 24 hours. Now that's a long time to channel, to meditate these energies. That to me could very well be this spirit of Antichrist forming on the earth today. And this has been going on since 1995. And their strategy here is to implement this divine plan I was speaking about through these contacts with these supposed extraterrestrials, which we know now are demonic beings. Now, the first festival that they celebrate is called the Festival of Humanity. It normally occurs at the first full moon of April. They also recognize it as Easter because they commemorate the risen, living Christ, who they believe is Lord Maitreya. Now, the second festival, and one of the most significant festivals, is called the Festival of Wesak. It's often called the Festival of the Buddha, which they believe is Lord Maitreya. It's a Buddhist festival. But during the Festival of Wesak, while all these people are channeling and meditating for 24 hours, the Ascended Masters also perform a sacred magical ceremony in the Himalaya Mountains, in this Shambhala, this kingdom where they supposedly dwell. And the purpose of this ritual during Wesak is to invoke Lord Maitreya, or the Buddha, so that his physical and spiritual presence can influence our world's political and social systems. This is what they are doing. And we need to be aware of this as Christians. This is insane. It's insanity. What is happening to these people's bodies while they are transmitting these energies? In all likelihood, they are becoming possessed, number one. Their minds could be being manipulated also. Something could be happening to their minds. Now, the third festival, which occurs at these power spots, and it usually falls in the month of June, at the full moon of June. These are full moon festivals. It's called the Festival of the Christ, or World Invocation Day. And what these people do is they recite simultaneously the great invocation, which is now considered a world prayer. And this great invocation was given to Alice Bailey by the Ascended Masters. She channeled this prayer. And we can see right here the purpose which the Masters know and serve. The Masters, the Ascended Masters of the Great White Brotherhood I spoke about. And down here, restore the plan on earth, the divine plan. This is what they are trying to accomplish right now. This is often referred to as the Christ consciousness. So they are mass meditating and reciting this prayer for 24 hours. That's a long time. Well, according to these New Age leaders, they believe that these three linked spiritual festivals form the cornerstone of today's emerging New World Order. This worldwide religion based on the invocation or conjuration of these ascended masters and numerous extraterrestrials. This is the plan. And they are performing it right now. They're involved in this. Now, interestingly, these transmission meditations take place on these specific dates on the calendar year, at certain times of the day. They're carried out at these specific geographical locations across the globe, recognized as power spots. And as we've seen before, a lot of other activity occurs at these power spots. Animal mutilations, UFO sightings, mysterious creatures. They also celebrate other festivals. 9 minor moon festivals, full moon festivals, during the other months of the year. They have solar festivals, which coincides with the equinoxes and the solstices. So there's all sorts of festivals going on where these people conglomerate at these power spots. And they mass meditate for 24 hours. But it's interesting that if you look at witchcraft and Satanism, they also celebrate similar festivals at these times, especially dealing with the equinoxes and the solstices. And earlier I mentioned Stonehenge and these power spots. And if you read anything on Stonehenge, you find information that the Druids were involved in building this area, and that they had sacrifices there during the solstices, during the equinoxes. And they were attempting to conjure these entities into our reality through blood sacrifices. In fact, they often needed a human or animal sacrifice to evoke these spirits or these demons. Blood is an essential ingredient during these magical ceremonies. They usually drink the blood of the victim, or they spread it all over their body. So we have to be aware of these festivals that are going on, that they are ushering in this spirit of Antichrist. They are setting up Satan's kingdom right now. So what else happened in 1987? I know that was an important date, and I mentioned that earlier. A lot happened. That was a pivotal time period. The Harmonic Convergence is what started all this meditation, this mass meditation. But something else occurred in 1987. And we saw Whitley Strieber's book Communion hit the markets. And Strieber claimed that he was abducted by these alien creatures, and bizarre things happened to him. Sinister experience. He even admits in his book that he believed these beings were demons, or could have been demons. He also admitted that before writing this book, he delved into the occult. He studied Buddhism, mysticism, witchcraft. So he was set up for this thing to take place in his life, because he was already involved in occult activities. But after this book came out, and this actually renewed the public's interest in the UFO phenomenon at this time. But other claims of alien abductions emerged. Thousands of people claimed that they were having similar experiences with abductions, being taken against their will into spaceships. Weird things were going on, medical experiments. sexual activity. They often claimed that a light would come through their bedroom window, and they would see figures in this light. And oftentimes, they claimed that they saw animals in this light. Wolves, monkeys, owls. Even Whitley Strieber claimed that he saw an owl in this light. Others reported seeing angels or devils in this light. Then these animals or spiritual beings turned into these gray, humanoid, alien beings. Now, interestingly, if you study the Middle Ages, the practice of demonology was prevalent during this time. In fact, ancient families regularly practiced magic with the intention of conjuring these demons. In fact, these ancient families, in all likelihood, are the ones involved in these occult secret societies, the Freemasons, the Illuminati. And oftentimes, or what occurred when they conjured these demons, is they attached these demons to their children. So demonology became generational, and it always has been generational. But we can see evidence of this during the Middle Ages. Members of the same family are inhabited by demons for generations. This is what went on. These demons even had distinct names, and they manifested into different physical forms. Here's some of the forms that they manifested into. And you can see they appeared as angels or spiritual beings. They appeared as humans. They appeared as animals. They appeared as birds. They appeared as all sorts of creatures with claws and fangs even. So they could take on any shape or form they wanted. So maybe we've seen a lot of mechanisms involved here in the strategy and what's going on in these areas. So how could our government be involved? Well, maybe if Lord Maitreya walks out of a spaceship, that spaceship may be in fact manufactured by our military. Possibility. Also, the late Dr. Malachi Martin, who performed thousands of exorcisms. He was a Catholic priest. He claimed that before his death, that since the 1970s, in the United States alone, that there has been an 800% increase in demonic possession and oppression. That's a very high statistic. Now, I talked about demonology and it being generational, that they attach these demons to family members. In fact, the children were involved in satanic rituals at a very early age. Well, within the abduction phenomenon, the pattern that so often emerges is a parent is abducted and his or her child is then abducted. So what's going on with these abductees? And there claim to be thousands of them. Well, it's very possible that, in all likelihood, these people are becoming sleepers, that their mind is being programmed, and that they can be triggered at any time by anything, a TV commercial, a phone call. They can be triggered to do something. And they won't know what they're doing because they enter into another personality. So what's frightening to me is there could be thousands of sleepers out there who can be triggered. They might be triggered by our government. These abductions are focused on children. These abductions are focused on children. And children are being attacked by these forces, or being targeted by these forces. And if we look at the Columbine High School shooting, these kids were into the occult. They were into Hitler. And in fact, Hitler studied Madame Blavatsky, Theosophy. And he openly admitted that he was the Antichrist. We can see how these forces are at work throughout history. During an abduction or contact experience, the aliens sometimes place black hoods over their own heads. Well, that's often done in witchcraft, Satanism. During an abduction or contact experience, an individual may encounter a divine taller being, known as the Exalted One, the Old One, or simply the One. This may result in some type of mystical, spiritual, or religious awakening for that individual. That may be Satan himself. But in all likelihood, these people's minds are being manipulated. They're turning into sleepers. They could be triggered to do something. Maybe they'll be triggered to worship Maitreya. If you have thousands of people worshiping the beast, the Antichrist, everybody else is going to follow. Maybe they'll kill people. Who knows what could happen? Now, months or even years after these abduction or contact encounters occur, these people often observe mysterious unmarked black helicopters flying over their homes. So evidently, our government knows who these people are. Maybe they're working hand in hand with these demonic entities. That the mind manipulation is done by both of them. They're in cahoots with each other. In fact, it is claimed that there are a lot of Satanists involved in our military. I interviewed a lady involved with mind control who claimed that both her parents were Satanists. They were both involved in the military. In fact, her mother had top secret clearance. She claimed that the government knows who these families are, and that the Satanists and the government are working hand in hand. Well, it sounds like Satan here is trying to imitate Christ, that this kingdom is forming, that the transmission meditation groups are inviting this energy in. They're the workers. They're the bees. They're evoking these entities into our reality, thinking that they are benevolent extraterrestrials. But we've seen that they're not. They're the false deities of the Old Testament. And their deceptive, masterminded mission is taking place at this very time. We've been conditioned over the years to believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial. Through television, movies, the internet, people are accepting this fact as real, as the truth, when in reality that's not the truth. I've studied this phenomenon. I've seen its workings. It's very deceptive. But what they're trying to accomplish is taking place to deceive the entire world, and millions of people are waiting for these ships to come down from the sky. And they truly believe that a cosmic master, an Aquarian Age Christ, is going to step out and unite the world. That may happen. It may not. If the Antichrist walks out of a spaceship, he could. He may not. It might be built by our government. Now, with all these events going on, with these UFO sightings, these apparitions, so-called contact with these extraterrestrials, these ascended masters, mysterious human and animal mutilations, these are all going on. Most often in these same areas, these geographical locations, we also have claims of satanic ritual abuse. We have a rise of witchcraft and satanic cults. We have the appearance of these strange creatures roaming numerous countrysides, and an 800% increase in demonic possession and oppression. So my friends, the spirit of Antichrist is here. And as Christians, we need to be aware of this plan, this divine plan that has been taking place. It's been going on for a long time. We've traced it back to the 1800s. We see all the occult mechanisms involved, and it's using everything it can get its hands on. Satan is the arch deceiver. But if we're aware of all these mechanisms, we can witness to people involved in the New Age, that the only way to obtain eternal life is through Christ, our Lord and Savior, the real Jesus Christ. And He's not an extraterrestrial. The Bible doesn't speak about any ascended masters, does it? No. It speaks about Jesus being the Son of God, and that He came down to earth and died for our sins. He was the ultimate sacrifice, and only through Him can we be saved. And the Bible also points to this deception. And we read in Timothy, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils." Sounds like the channelings that are taking place within the New Age community at this present time. Giving heed to seducing spirits, doctrines of devils. And in Luke, we read, "Then said he unto them, Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines, and pestilences. And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven." Great signs in the skies. We're certainly seeing that. And in 2 Corinthians, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed, as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." The Bible exposes these ascended masters. He's exposing Satan, that Satan's appearing as good, appearing as an angel of light. So we know through Scripture that Satan will be ultimately defeated. That this plan of deception may work for a short time, but in the end, Jesus Christ will come and take His true people back to heaven, where we will live with Him forever and ever. Thank you.